to insert values to the table in the last video. So now we are going to read all the users from the table. So in the users table particularly. So let's do that. So what we did was we don't need this reset file anymore. Let's go back to users now. So we have a file called user actually, Python file. So what I did here was I created a class, the user class, and I used class method to create this method called set user. So where this will be useful is that it's going to take all the details of the user, and you can see here I set it as none. So it means that if the attribute wasn't passed, it will set the attribute to none. That's just what it means, and it depends on whether it will be called or not. But the idea is that whatever ID value will be passed is going to feed that into the class. So it's going to set it the class. All these details now that I set to none is going to set them here. So that's what CLS means. So CLS.id to set the ID from none to the value that we pass to this set user. The username, first name, the same thing. So later we'll see where that is important. So but the first method we want to perform here is to see how we can call all the values in our Postgres database, and that's the script we wrote here. So as usual, the first thing we need to do is to create the connection here, and remember we're taking from the db file. It's just calling this class and the method connect, then we are returning the connection, and that's what we did here. So we are now storing that in con, and now we putting that in the try except block. We are now using a context manager to now create our cursor this time, and we're saying con.cursor and as call. So the idea of this is so that it closes automatically when we are done using it. So once we've created our cursor, remember, first create your connection, second create the cursor. The third thing we need to do is to execute, but we need a query to execute. So this is the query here, and here we're able to write the query as select all from that asterisk from users. This is the table, name of table. So order by ID as this ASC, which means in ascending order. So basically from one downwards. That's what it means, right? So it's going to select all users, all records from the users table, and it's going to order that. That's what it means. So we'll put that query in the cursor.execute method, and that's the third thing we need to do. And the final thing we need to do is to commit. But before we commit, we also need to show the values that will be gotten from this select query, and we need to use this method called fetch all. So it's going to on the cursor, so it's going to fetch all the values and store them in a variable called fetch. So what I did here was, like, I did a for loop into that fetch. I said fetch for record in fetch. So it's going to take each of these lists, or whatever is formed there, most likely a list. It's going to take each of that and store it as, call it as record. So it's saying in that is now going to access that and say I want to get the ID, and is going to take that record and say get me the where you have the key as ID, get it for me, or the sorry, I mean the column as ID, get it for me. Now this is where the importance of this comes in, because we use cursor_factory and PSY dict cursor, and PSY means actually Postgres PSYCOPG2 .extras there. So what that helps us to do is that instead of us using something like in first position ID 0, we are instead using this ID, the name of the column. And in this other case, we would have done this in one and it will work, but we're doing this instead. So it's better because imagine you have 50 columns or more and you need to start addressing them by their index position. It'll be a whole lot of work, but once you use the name of the column, it will be easier. So that's the essence of having that. So once it gets the record, it will now display each of the values in this format. So this /n means move to the next line. So it's going to first display the ID, then to display the username, then it will display the first name, last name, created at, and it will also display the updated at from the database. So let me just make this word wrap. So that way. So at the end of the day, it's going to store all this into rstr variable, and I want to print that out. So it's going to print that out on the console and return true. And it will catch any errors. If you notice, we used error here and exception. So that error is from this place here. So PSYCOPG2 has its own errors. You can catch them. So import error from PSYCOPG2 and the regular expression. So you just print out the error. And finally, we close the connection. So that's how we can show all the records in the database, in the Postgres database. So PostgreSQL database. So let's run that. So we're going to call the class user, and remember we are importing the user here from models, which is the package .user, which is where we wrote all this here, and we are now importing the user class, which is up here. So after we do that, we have to call this method called all, static method. So if you notice, that's why we tell user.all. So that's what it means. So we're now going to run this. And now we can see, now we've done that, we can see now is doing exactly what we want. It's releasing the ID number, the name, username, first name, last name, created at, updated at. And now it's giving us the 5 users in our database. So we've been able to do that. So that's simply how to, using this script, we've been able to print out all the users in our database, PostgreSQL database.